Hey everybody, what's going on? Fabian for Liberty, fabianforliberty.com is my website. Thank you for joining me. In this video, I want to talk about Donald Trump's remarks on the Federal Reserve, which I found very interesting. One of the few presidential candidates that I know of, at least in the last 16 years, to address the Fed. If there's others, I'd love to hear about them. Those other two were Ron Paul, of course, and his son, Rand Paul. But Donald Trump is, of course, the first one to come out and say that in this election cycle, and out of any of the other contenders that ran for the Republican nomination, to say that the Fed has created a fake economy. Now, in the primaries, he was getting slack because basically they were saying that he had benefited from the zero rate interest rates in his sales of condominiums and what have you. The truth is that anyone in business, anybody in a business environment where they need to use credit or they need to sell to people who use credit benefit from 0% interest rate policies. And that's what the Fed hopes, right? It hopes that it will fuel the appetite for cheap money so that inflation is caused via buying assets, right? Buying into the stock market, buying real estate, buying cars, all kinds of things. And what it does is it creates bubbles. And that's the only thing that's really happened since 2008. There hasn't really been a recovery as much as there's been manipulation by the Federal Reserve with 0% interest rates going back to 2000 under George Bush and then Barack Obama to create a $1 trillion plus student debt bubble, $1 trillion plus subprime bubble, the dollar bubble, the real estate bubble, the stock market bubble, which is all potentially in failure mode with just one event. That's what's different, I think. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and he's in the real estate field, and he was mentioning that the crash for real estate, he thought, there's going to be a crash. I don't think it'll be as bad as 2008, though, is what he said. And I said, well, look, nobody knows really what's going to happen or how big the crash may or may not be. However, I suspect that the crash will not just be one asset this time around. It'll be multiple assets, and it'll be a larger panic than we've really ever seen in this country. So that is, the potential for that certainly exists. For Donald Trump to come out and talk about the Federal Reserve, I think is a big deal. Certainly you're not going to hear that from Hillary Clinton, who is in bed with the Federal Reserve banksters that basically finance her campaign and all the other big banks that are partial owners of the Federal Reserve. So that's important. Look, if we want to rebuild an economy, that opportunity existed in 2008. And it has to happen when malinvestments are flushed out of the market. So basically right now what we have is malinvestments. Now what do I mean by that? That's an Austrian economic term of assets that have gone up. They're malinvestments because of the artificial cheap money that's been created has fueled those markets towards the upside. In order for an economy to rebuild with health, there of course needs to be savings and investments, right? And for that to happen, people aren't going to save their money, or the Fed it does not want people to save their money. It's why central banks around the world punish savers with 0% interest rates, in some cases negative interest rates, which are not working, right? None of this is working. That's important to note as well. The alternative, what can work, is that when there is a crash, or at least in now, you could somewhat begin to raise rates and manage the crash and be frank with the consumer and the American people about what's going to happen, versus what the alternative is, what the internationalists love is create the crash, know it's coming, and then impose more draconian regulations and draconian financial monetary mechanics to fuel not only their agenda, but to tell people, no, this is all fine. We just need $5 trillion more to pump into the economy and turn everything around. They also use this to blame people that they do not like in order for they can seize more control. Quite frankly, I look at the landscape, and I did a video about Nigel Farage last week, where I don't think this is working anymore. I think people that even have a rudimentary understanding of economics, or for that matter, no understanding at all, are beginning to become hip to there's something fundamentally wrong with economics in this country. Now, last month, the Fed said they may raise interest rates in September. Remember, they were supposed to raise interest rates 4 times in 2016. I said that would never happen. I think it is all but impossible for the Federal Reserve to raise rates prior to this election, knowing that they want to nominate Hillary Clinton, a globalist, that will continue their agenda. And, I'm a little conflicted by that as well, because I really do believe the theory that if she wins, and when the crash does happen, it will again fuel more nationalism and populism, like what we saw in Brexit, like what we're seeing around the world, like what we're seeing with the Trump campaign, that will hurt their internationalist pipe dreams, right? So if Trump wins, and if they were able to get Trump into office, the economy crashes, well, then they could blame it on Brexit. They could blame it on all these rising nationalist ideas and solutions that are being posed, and say those are what's causing the harm in the economy. Those is what's crashed the economy. And I think that's a pretty compelling argument. Now, I'll wrap it up with this. I think it's good for Trump to say this. I think that a president, although cannot influence so much the Federal Reserve, I certainly do believe that when you have Barack Obama meeting with Janet Yellen in impromptu closed-door meetings, certainly that influence does happen because the big banks influence the presidents. They elect the presidents in many cases. That wouldn't be the case so much with Donald Trump. He really isn't really someone who is bought and sold by the big banks. So for him to come out and say this, I think, is a positive indicator, and he's leveling with the American people, being truthful to the American people, that yes, indeed, this is a fake economy that's been created. The only way out of it is for a managed crash, or for the crash to take place, raise interest rates, and go suffer through the pain for a couple of years until you could rebuild. It's similar to, for example, a drug addict. A drug addict a heroin addict, let's say, may be able to have some kind of methadone treatment for a period of time. At some point, if he wants to get clean, he has to get off the methadone and go through some serious withdrawals that are going to really, he's going to feel like the world is coming to an end. It's going to probably take a few months to go over that and get through that. But on the other side emerges somebody new who is not chemically dependent anymore. It's the same exact situation. That's why that analogy is used all the time with the economy. You go through the crash. Unfortunately, it'll be more than a few months. It'll be more like a couple of years. But on the other side, you could rebuild an economy that truly is creating good-paying jobs, that truly is allowing consumers to save and then take that money and invest in new opportunities. That's what is needed. Whether or not Donald Trump can execute that or push in that direction if he's elected, only time will tell. But I'd love to hear your feedback on this. I'm Fabian Calvo, Fabian for Liberty. Thanks for watching my videos. And again, check out FabianForLiberty.com. Thanks.